You have 24 hours to demolish that eyesore, or we're calling the sheriff. That's what the HOA president screamed at me 3 days after I moved into my mountain cabin. She thought she could threaten me into giving up my lake. She had no idea that I owned her docks. When I first arrived in Pine Valley, I thought I'd finally outrun chaos. The air smelled like pine needles and rain-soaked stone. And the lake glittered in the afternoon sun like a mirror reflecting a life I'd almost forgotten I deserved. After a bitter divorce and too many nights staring at peeling apartment walls, this land felt like salvation. It wasn't just acreage. It was piece of second chance left behind by my uncle, Silas Brennan. Uncle Silas had been the family enigma. The kind of man who showed up at Christmas covered in sawdust and mountain dust, mumbling about how the land keeps secrets for those who listen. While everyone else laughed him off as eccentric, I listened. Maybe that's why, when his lawyer called saying I'd inherited his lake property, I didn't hesitate. I sold what little I owned, packed up my tools, and pointed my old pickup toward Colorado's high country. The road twisted through pine forests and wild sage until reached it, 5 acres of raw beauty perched beside a crystal lake. The place smelled like new beginnings, sap, earth, diesel, and freedom. The old workshop still stood where Silas had built it, its door hanging slightly crooked like a tired smile. There was an unfinished concrete foundation near the Shorehay's dream project, perhaps abandoned years ago. I decided I'd finish it, build my own cabin, and finally create something that wouldn't collapse under the weight of lawyers and loneliness. The first few days felt like therapy disguised as labor. The rhythmic bite of saws, the echo of hammers, the hum of cicadas under a fading sky. It all blended into something that felt healing. Each nail I drove in was a small rebellion against the failure I'd been carrying for years. I even called my daughter Emma that night. Told her she'd have her own room by the lake. For the first time, she sounded proud of me. I didn't know it then, but peace in Pine Valley was a borrowed illusion. Because 3 days later, a convoy of luxury SUVs would rumble up my dirt road, dust swirling behind them like a warning from the mountains. And leading that charge was a woman who believed she owned everything she could see except my patience. The third morning started like a postcard. Mist curled off the lake. Sunlight filtered through pine branches, and the scent of wet soil clung to the air. I'd just set my coffee mug on a half-finished porch beam when I heard the low rumble of engines climbing my dirt road. At first, I thought it was delivery trucks bringing supplies. Then I saw the glint of chrome and heard tires crunching gravel in unison. 3 SUVs rolled up like they were invading private territory. Doors swung open, and out stepped a woman in a bright pink business suit and sunglasses that probably cost more than my entire tool set. Her heels clicked against the uneven ground like gunfire. A clipboard rested in her hand, her weapon of choice. "Excuse me," she said, her voice crisp enough to cut glass. "Are you the individual responsible for this unauthorized construction?" I set down my saw, wiping sweat and sawdust from my face. "I'm building on my land." "Name's Marcus Brennan." "You are?" "Victoria Ashworth," she replied, chin lifted like a queen greeting a peasant. "President of the Pine Valley Homeowners Association. And what you're doing violates at least 6 community covenants." Community. I looked around. The nearest house was half a mile away, hidden behind pines. I didn't realize I had neighbors. Her lips twitched into a practiced smile. "All properties surrounding this lake fall under our jurisdiction. Your uncle signed these covenants years ago." She flipped through her papers dramatically. "That means you've inherited not only the land, but the obligations that come with it." Something about her tone made my stomach tighten. "That's funny," I said, "because my uncle passed away 8 months ago." She didn't flinch. "Then perhaps you should have read the bylaws before breaking ground." She handed me a crisp envelope, cease and desist order stamped across the top in red. "You have 48 hours to remove all construction materials. Fines begin immediately thereafter." The wind picked up, scattering dust between us. The smell of pine mixed with her floral perfume, a clash of worlds, natural and artificial. I could almost taste the arrogance in the air. "You can't just—" I began. "Oh, I can," she interrupted. "We take community standards very seriously. This rustic shack of yours, it threatens property values. Her eyes flicked to my truck, my calloused hands, my worn boots. This isn't really the type of neighborhood where people in your situation typically thrive. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. My situation? I'd hate, she added sweetly, for your daughter to be embarrassed by any unpleasantness. That line hit like a punch to the ribs. She'd done her homework dug into my divorce, my custody battles, my financial strain. She turned sharply, heels stabbing the dirt, and climbed back into her BMW. 48 hours. Mr. Brennan, she called out the window, don't make this harder than it needs to be. As her convoy disappeared down the road, I stared at the papers trembling in my hand. Somewhere between the legal jargon and her smug tone, I heard my uncle's words echo again. The land keeps secrets for those who listen. I had no idea yet that his secret would be the one thing powerful enough to destroy her empire. Asterisk, that night, I couldn't sleep. The mountain air was cool, the moon reflected off the lake like polished glass, but my mind was boiling. Every word that woman had said kept looping through my head. You have 48 hours. It wasn't just arrogance. It was control. And control was something I'd lost too many times before, first to lawyers, then to life. Not this time. At sunrise, I packed up the so-called violation notice and drove straight into town. The county courthouse was a squat brick building that smelled like paper, old coffee, and quiet arguments. The clerk, Betty, looked up from her desk with a smile that said she'd seen every kind of trouble pass through those doors. What can I help you with, honey? She asked. I need to see everything filed under Pine Valley HOA, I said, setting the papers down. Specifically, anything involving my property, Lot 27, North Lakeshore. What? HOA trouble already? You just moved in, yeah, I muttered. And they're already threatening to fine me for breathing wrong. Betty disappeared into a back room. The minutes dragged, filled with the flicker of fluorescent lights and the low hum of old air conditioning. When she returned, she carried a stack of dusty binders and maps that looked older than me. Here's something odd, she said, flipping through a file. This HOA was formed 6 months ago. I frowned. My uncle died 8 months ago. Exactly. She slid a map across the counter. See this red outline? That's their jurisdiction. In this big gray section, your land takes up more than half their territory. Looks like somebody drew these lines after the fact. I leaned in, tracing the map with my finger. My 5 acres formed the heart of the lake. Without it, the HOA's lake access vanished completely. Betty lowered her voice. Most of these signatures belong to the same family, Ashworth. That's your pink suit lady's name, right? My pulse thudded. She built an HOA around my property. To control my lake? Wouldn't be the first time, Betty said. Some folks form HOAs to boost value. Others use them to squeeze people out. I thanked her and left, gripping the documents like weapons. Outside, the air smelled sharper electric, like an oncoming storm. I realized Victoria hadn't just overstepped, she'd built her empire on lies. Back at my cabin, I spread the records across my workbench under the flickering light. My uncle's words echoed again, the land keeps secrets. Maybe this was what he meant. Maybe he'd seen this coming. The silence of the mountains pressed around me, heavy and watchful. For the first time since I arrived, the lake didn't look peaceful, it looked patient, as if it knew something I didn't. I poured myself another cup of cold coffee and stared at the cease and desist order until my hands stopped shaking. If Victoria Ashworth wanted a war, she'd just declared it on the wrong man. Asterisk, the next few days felt like living under siege. Every morning I'd wake to a new violation notice pinned to my gate, each one more ridiculous than the last. Unauthorized with stain color, improper soil displacement, offensive structural aesthetic. I almost laughed the first time. By the 5th notice, I wasn't laughing anymore. Then came the blockade. One afternoon, 3 SUVs parked diagonally across my driveway. Not close enough to count as trespassing. Just enough to make sure I couldn't leave without performing a 20-point turn. When I walked over to ask what they were doing, one of the men rolled down his window just far enough to say, Public road, buddy. Free country. Then he smiled like a man enjoying a private joke. The next morning, I found nails scattered across my access path, roofing nails perfectly placed to shred tires. Someone had also removed the survey stakes marking my property line. That night, I heard footsteps crunching the gravel outside my cabin, followed by the sound of a car door closing in the dark. It wasn't random vandalism. It was tactical intimidation. But the worst blow didn't come from the mountain. It came from my phone, Dad. What's happening? Emma's voice cracked through the line. Someone posted pictures of you on Facebook. They're saying you're dangerous, that you threaten people. My chest went cold. Where did you see that? In some community group called Pine Valley Safety Watch. They say you're under investigation. My friends saw it at school. The thought of my daughter sitting there, reading lies about her father, it burned deeper than any wound. That night, I scrolled through the group myself. There I was, my photo from an old electrician's newsletter now captioned, "Unstable man harassing residents." Possible criminal background? Dozens of comments followed. Get this creep out. Call the sheriff. Protect our kids. Victoria had taken the fight online, poisoning my reputation one post at a time. I closed the laptop and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. Behind me, the lake shimmered under the moonlight. Silent. Waiting. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about property. This was about control, humiliation, and fear. And if Victoria wanted to make me the villain of her story, I was about to rewrite the ending. When you've been pushed into a corner enough times, you learn to stop swinging blindly and start aiming carefully. After the Facebook smear campaign, I knew I couldn't win this by shouting louder. I needed precision. I needed someone who knew how to tear apart lies in a courtroom. That's how I met Sarah Kim. A friend of a friend gave me her. Number said she was the kind of lawyer who doesn't blink when bullies scream. Her office sat above a bakery in town. The smell of fresh bread and burnt coffee filled the air when I stepped inside. She wore no-nonsense glasses and the kind of calm that made angry people nervous. So, she said, flipping through Victoria's cease and desist order. This is the HOA president? Yeah, I muttered. Queen Victoria herself? She says my cabin violates their covenants. Sarah leaned back. Funny thing about covenants, they only apply if you agree to them. She turned the paper over. You didn't, and your uncle couldn't have. This association was created after his death. I blinked. So she's bluffing? Oh, more than bluffing, she said with a grin. She's trying to run a con using HOA authority that doesn't legally exist. That word con hit differently. Because that's exactly what this felt like. An organized scam wearing the mask of neighborhood. Decency. Sarah spent the next hour walking me through options like a chess master. Step 1, she said. We file a harassment and fraud complaint with the county. Step 2, we demand their financials. HOAs hate that. Step 3, we prepare for discovery. That's where people like your Victoria tend to fall apart. For the first time in weeks, I felt something strange. Relief. Not victory. Not yet. But the sense that maybe this war could be fought with more than anger and nails. Over the next few days, Sarah sent out formal notices, and word traveled fast. The HOA Facebook group went from smug to silent. But Victoria didn't vanish. She adapted. 2 days later, a county inspector showed up at my property, clipboard in hand. Orders from the top, he muttered, eyes darting away. They say you're violating environmental codes. You'll have to stop work immediately. I almost laughed. Let me guess. Complaints from Pine Valley HOA. He winced but didn't deny it. Sorry, buddy. I just do my job. As his truck drove off, I noticed the faint glimmer of sunlight reflecting off my lake, that perfect calm that comes before a storm breaks wide open. Victoria. I thought she could bury me in paperwork and false claims. She didn't realize she just handed me exactly what I needed. Proof of corruption and misuse of county authority. And once Sarah saw that, once we connected those dots, Victoria's empire would start to crumble from the inside out. Asterisk. The mountain nights were supposed to be silent, just the wind, the creak, and the soft hum of crickets echoing across the water. But that night, something felt off. The air was too still, the darkness too thick. Like the woods themselves were holding their breath, I was in my cabin working on electrical plans when I heard it, a distant metallic clang, followed by the low sputter of an engine. My first thought was wildlife. Then I smelled it. Gasoline. Sharp. Chemical. Wrong. When I stepped outside, the world tilted. My lumber pile, weeks of work, was scattered like matchsticks. My generator lay on its side, leaking fuel into the dirt. Nails glimmered across my access road like metallic confetti under the moonlight. Someone had been here. Someone wanted to send a message. Anger hit me hard, but training took over. I grabbed my flashlight and camera, documenting every inch. Then, at dawn, I went into town and bought what Victoria's goons didn't expect me to have: technology. I spent the next 48 hours wiring motion sensors, floodlights, and a set of night vision cameras that would make a survivalist jealous. If they wanted to keep playing dirty, I'd make sure every move was recorded in 1080p. It didn't take long. 3 nights later, I was jolted awake by my alarm. The monitor flashed movement near the lumber stack. My heart hammered as I watched the live feed. A shadowy figure creeping along the edge of my property, gas can in hand. The person knelt, started pouring, then looked up. The camera caught the face clearly. Young, familiar. Tommy Ashworth, Victoria's son. He froze as the floodlights exploded to life, bathing the yard in white. For a split second, he looked straight into the lens, panic written all over him, then bolted toward a waiting pickup truck and disappeared down the road. I replayed the footage again and again, each frame a nail sealing Victoria's coffin. She'd crossed the final line from harassment to crime. By morning, I handed the evidence to Sheriff Davidson himself. He didn't say much, but the look in his eyes said it all. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, asterisk. When people fight that hard to take something that isn't theirs, there's always a reason, and it's usually spelled with $signs. A few days after turning Tommy's arson footage over to the sheriff, I was back at the county courthouse with Sarah. The air inside buzzed faintly with flickering fluorescent lights, and the place smelled like dust and old paper, the scent of buried truths. Betty. The clerk greeted us with that same knowing look. "You're back," she said, half smiling. "Guessing your problem hasn't gone away." "Not yet," I said. "But I think we're close to finding out why she wants me gone." We pored over land use filings, zoning proposals, and planning commission minutes. For hours, nothing stood out until Sarah froze mid-page. "Hold on," she whispered. "Look at this." She slid a document toward me. A proposal from Mountain Vista Resorts dated just 6 months ago. It outlined plans for a $50 million luxury resort, complete with golf course, spa, and exclusive lake access. And right in the middle of their proposed site map, highlighted in bold, sat my property. "They can't even start construction without your land," Sarah said, tapping the map. "Victoria's been working for them. Probably promised a huge payout if she cleared you out." I stared at the page, anger rising like wildfire. It all made sense now. The sudden HOA formation, the legal harassment, the smear campaign. She wasn't protecting community standards. She was protecting her commission. Betty leaned in, whispering, "Developers like these don't operate alone. Someone up the county ladder must have approved this fast-track plan. Follow the money, and you'll find your queen bee's hive." As Sarah gathered copies of the documents, I looked out the courthouse window at the mountains, silent. Ancient witnesses to our human greed. Victoria hadn't just built an HOA to bully me. She'd built a legal front for a land grab. And every day I refused to sell was costing her and her partners a fortune. The game had changed. She thought she was playing chess, but I was about to flip the whole board. Asterisk, the night after discovering the resort plans. I couldn't shake the feeling that Uncle Silas had known all of this long before I did. His voice kept echoing in my head. The land keeps secrets for those who listen. I decided to listen. The next morning, fog hung low over the lake and dew clung to the grass like tiny shards of glass. I walked into my uncle's old workshop, A place that still smelled of sawdust, motor oil, pipe tobacco, the scent of his world. Dust motes floated in the sunlight like slow-moving ghosts. I'd cleaned the place a dozen times since moving in. But that morning, something drew me toward the far corner, a warped section of floorboard under his old workbench. When I pressed down, it gave slightly beneath my boot. Hollow. I grabbed a crowbar and pried it open. The sound, a sharp metallic clang, echoed through the room like a bell announcing destiny. Beneath the floor lay a steel lockbox, painted military green, the kind used to store secrets no one was ever meant to find. The metal was cold, heavy, and covered in decades of dust. The lock combination came to me like instinct, Silas's birthday. The dial clicked 3 times, and the latch popped open with a soft hiss of released air. Inside were neatly stacked manila folders, a faded notebook, and a pile of documents stamped with legal seals. On top lay an incorporation certificate. Brennan Holdings, LLC, incorporated March 15th, 1998. Sole. Proprietor Silas J. Brennan. I flipped through the papers, and my hands started to tremble. He hadn't just owned this lake. He'd owned everything around it. The files detailed how, back in 2010, the original Pine Valley developer had gone bankrupt during the housing crash. While everyone else panicked, Silas quietly bought up the defaulted mortgages. Not the houses themselves, but the land beneath them. Every home in what became Victoria's precious HOA sat on property my uncle owned through that company. My breath caught as I read the last line on one of the deeds. All ownership rights and future revenues hereby transferred to the heir of Silas J. Brennan. I sat back, heart pounding. The truth crashed over me like a storm breaking through glass. I wasn't fighting for a piece of land anymore. I was the landlord of every single person who'd been harassing me, including Victoria Ashworth, her mansion. Her docks? All of it sat on my ground. For a long moment, I just stared at the papers, the lake glimmering through the workshop window. This wasn't just power, it was responsibility. I could evict her, ruin her, or use this leverage to rebuild everything she'd destroyed. Uncle Silas hadn't buried these secrets to hurt anyone. He'd left them for the moment when truth mattered more than revenge, and that moment had finally arrived. Friday night came with the weight of thunder in the air. The Pine Valley Community Center, normally used for bake sales and town potlucks, looked like a courtroom. Folding chairs packed the space wall to wall, the hum of whispers blending with the metallic buzz of fluorescent lights. Cameras lined the back wall, news crews, bloggers, curious locals. Everyone had come to see the showdown between the unstable cabin builder, the queen of the HOA. Victoria Ashworth stood at the podium like she was addressing a nation. Her hair was perfect, her pearl necklace gleamed under the lights, and her voice dripped with polished confidence. A large projector displayed the title of her presentation in bold letters. Protecting Pine Valley, the threat of Marcus Brennan. She started strong. This man, she said, pointing at my photo on the screen, has harassed our families, defied community law, and endangered our safety. He owes this association over $97,000 in fines and damages. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, fearful, angry, confused. I sat quietly in the back row beside Sarah, watching. She glanced at me and whispered, "When you stand up, go slow. Let the silence do the work," Victoria continued, flipping through slides showing my half-built cabin, pictures of my truck, even screenshots from the fake safety Facebook posts. "He's refused every legal order to cease construction," she said. "We can't allow chaos to ruin our community. That's why I've called this emergency vote to authorize legal removal of." I stood up. The room fell silent as I walked to the front, the sound of my boots echoing like thunder. Victoria's confident tone faltered. "You have no right to speak here," she snapped. I stopped beside her podium, holding a leather folder under my arm. "Actually," I said, calm but loud enough for the crowd to hear, "I have every right in this room. In fact, I have more than anyone here." She frowned. "You're not even part of this association." "Exactly," I said, setting the folder on the podium. "Because I don't answer to it." I opened the folder and pulled out a single page. The deed. My name is Marcus Brennan, heir to Brennan Holdings LLC. My uncle Silas Brennan didn't just own 5 acres by this lake. He owned every acre underneath your homes, your roads, your precious docks. And now I do. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. Someone dropped a coffee cup. It shattered against the floor. I spread the documents out across the podium, incorporation records, county deeds, bank transfers. Each stamped, notarized, legal. Every mortgage payment you've made, I said evenly, was actually rent. Every HOA fee you've collected, Mrs. Ashworth, you've stolen. You've been charging people for managing land you don't even own. Victoria lunged forward, voice cracking. Lies. This is fake. But Sheriff Davidson stepped out from the crowd, holding up a folder of his own. Actually, it checks out, he said. We verified the holdings. And Mrs. Ashworth, you're 3 months behind on rent. The crowd exploded again, half in outrage, half in relief. The mask on Victoria's face shattered completely. You can't do this. She screamed. I am this community. No, I said quietly. You were its cage. She tried to grab the papers, but the sheriff stopped her as 2 deputies stepped forward. Federal investigators waiting for the signal entered through the side door. The cameras captured everything the moment Victoria Ashworth, self-proclaimed guardian of Pine Valley, was led away in handcuffs. I looked around at the faces, fear giving way to realization, hostility softening into shame. I'm not here for revenge, I said. I'm here for rebuilding. Those who took part in the lies will have to leave. The rest of you, your rent's cut in half. Together, we can make this a real community. Applause didn't come immediately, just stunned silence. But then, slowly, people began to clap. The sound grew louder, fuller, until it filled the room like thunder rolling through the valley. For the first time since I'd moved to Pine Valley, I felt something shift, not just justice, but balance. And as I walked out of that room, the night air smelled sweeter than it had in months, pine, rain, and the clean scent of freedom. Asterisk 3 months later, Pine Valley didn't look the same. The air still smelled like pine and lake water, but the tension that once clung to every breeze had vanished. The laughter of children drifted across the water again. For the first time since I moved here, the sound didn't sting. It healed Victoria Ashworth's mansion. The symbol of her control now sat dark and empty on the hill. Her once perfect lawn had grown wild with dandelions, tiny golden rebellions sprouting from the soil she no longer ruled. She was serving an 18-month federal sentence for fraud and arson attempts. Her family had quietly left town. The rest of us stayed, and we rebuilt. With Sarah's help, I restructured Brennan Holdings into a cooperative trust. Instead of landlords and tenants, we became partners. Families who'd been manipulated into fear now owned small pieces of the land they'd been living on for years. The HOA was dissolved, replaced by the Silas Brennan Community Fund, named after the man who had loved this mountain before anyone else saw its worth. Every dollar recovered from Victoria's schemes went into that fund. It paid for road repairs, scholarships for local kids, and free legal aid for families fighting abusive homeowner associations across the state. Word spread fast suddenly. People were calling from other towns, other states, asking how we did it. How a community once poisoned by greed became a model of cooperation. On weekends, I hosted neighborhood cookouts by the lake. The same people who once glared at me now brought homemade pies and asked if I needed help with wiring or repairs. The lake that had divided us now brought us together. Sometimes, I'd catch the reflection of the sunset rippling across the docks and think about how close I came to losing everything, and how much stronger we'd become because Emma visited often. She'd just gotten her acceptance letter to Colorado State, a full scholarship. When she hugged me that day, she smelled like shampoo and possibility. They loved my essay, Dad, she said, grinning. It was about how you taught me that strength isn't about revenge, it's about rebuilding. I didn't say anything. I just held her tighter, feeling that quiet pride that doesn't need words. Later that evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the water shimmer under a violet sky. She sipped her coffee, smiling softly. "You realize you didn't just save this place," she said. "You changed what it means to live here." I looked out at the lake, our lake, where laughter echoed and porch lights twinkled like grounded stars. "No," I said. "We did." A breeze rippled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain and wood smoke. Somewhere in that wind, I could almost hear Uncle Silas's voice again, calm, proud, content. The land keeps secrets for those who listen. Only this time, the secret wasn't about hidden deeds or buried lockboxes. It was about something much simpler, that peace isn't found in isolation. It's built one honest act at a time, with the people who choose to stay. As twilight deepened over Pine Valley, the lake mirrored the stars, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, reflection always brings light, months later. I still walk the edge of that lake at sunset, the same lake they tried to take from me. The water's calm now, like the mountain finally exhaled. Every ripple reminds me that the strongest people aren't the ones who fight hardest. They're the ones who rebuild after the storm. So tell me, what would you do if your neighbors tried to steal your land? Drop your story in the comments. And if this fight for justice made you believe in second chances, hit that like button and subscribe, because more true stories of power and redemption are coming next week.